Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're very happy to have you here or joining us virtually. I'm very happy to introduce to you Dr. Todd Campbell. He's coming to us from the University of Connecticut, where he's the department head for curriculum and instruction. His research focuses on cultivating imaginative and equitable representations of STEM activity. This is accomplished in formal science learning environments through partnering with pre-service and in-service teachers and leaders to collaboratively focus on supporting student use of modeling as an anchoring epistemic practice to reason about events that happen in the natural world. This work extends into informal learning environments through a focus on iterative design of informal learning spaces and equity-focused STEM identity research. Happy to introduce Dr. Todd Campbell.
Thank you. I'm going to make sure I shove this in. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the conversations I've been able to have. I'm ecstatic to be here. I'm learning about the Carey Institute. I'm ashamed to say I didn't know enough. I love the work that's happening and want to continue to learn more. The title of my talk I wanted to share with you today, I thought it was, of all the work that I'm doing, most appropriate to share with you. It's one of the things I'm most excited about in the work that I'm doing. It might be the thing that's most unrefined too, so you can help me think about it as well. And it's like all the work I'm doing now, it's equally as, the creation of it is equally attributable to other people I'm collaborating with, and I'll share some of those people. So the title is this Heterogeneity Seeking Curriculum, Planning and Instruction, and thinking particularly about engineering for ecological and social justice. And I'll talk more about why engineering. I wanted to start with who I am, so you know a little bit personally, and then I'll share professionally as well. This is my beautiful wife, Joy. We've been married for going on 35 years in September. We started in elementary school, we didn't. These are our 5 kids. There's a 8-year gap between our two oldest daughters and our 3 youngest sons. One of them's a sophomore in high school. One's an elementary teacher. One's a beautiful mom of our only grandchild who's 16 months old. He lives 9 minutes from us. One's a soon-to-be history teacher, secondary. We've got a scientist and a baker, I think. This is us as a family with our also wonderful engineer son-in-law and our grandson. I'm pointing. These are our animals, sedated right before bedtime. A land orca and a beagle and a vizsla. And then there's a grandson. And then we also have, that sits in the garage most of the time, it's running a 1974 bay window Volkswagen bus that I love. I want to electrify it, but that's never going to happen. My wife's not going to support it. Professionally, I went to school in North Carolina. I'm a first-generation college student. I did military service for 2 years out of high school as my way of how do I get to college in a way that I can pay for it. I got the Army College Fund, which supported me to do that. I was a 2-year grad in North Carolina. That led me to the University of Iowa. I was an undergrad chem major. I finished that, went right into secondary science teaching, the MAT program at Iowa. And then I did that for 3 years. I was a middle and high school teacher, rural high school teacher. I was the only 9-12 science teacher, so even though I was chemistry, I taught everything, 6 subjects, prepared or not. I went back to school to do my PhD. I did my work with Dr. Robert Yeager. He's an ecologist by training and turned science educator. I was his probably 112th PhD student that he chaired their committee. He was this exemplary leader, inspirational leader. He was president of the National Science Teacher Association, National Association of Research Science Teaching, AST, now as Association of Science Teacher. So he's just this really amazing role model for me. But what I really appreciated most about him is just his belief in how people could make a difference, and inspiring me to be part of that work. Now, I've been to Utah State University. I'm now at the University of Connecticut. I've been there 10 years. I work with pre-service secondary science teachers, so I teach the science teaching methods courses. And I'm also the department chair of curriculum instruction. We have about 25 faculty members. I did not aspire to be in administration. I love the research. I'm appreciative of the chance to be in service of my department colleagues. And I'm careful because I know we're being audio recorded. And then research I do is pretty diverse, expansive. I do work with pre-service and in-service teachers around professional learning. I think about models, both explanatory models and then now complex systems models, how those can anchor learning across the arc of an instructional unit for learners. I also do work in informal spaces, especially around natural resources. We do conservation action projects across the state of Connecticut, a couple rounds of NSF funding that have allowed us to do 175-ish projects across the state with teens and adults. So we do work around thinking about intergenerational learning. We're recently started thinking about eco-digital storytelling as this more expansive entry and transformative space that science can be more inclusive for those who might want to be in that space. These are some books that have really influenced the work I'm sharing here today. I was telling someone, I love this part of the presentation because I usually take a picture of this. I think the slides will be there. You don't have to do it because it helps me find the next book I'm going to read, and a lot of times I'm listening. Just go through some of them, like this is Designs for the Pluriverse, Arturo Escobar. I love his work, and I've read a couple of his books. This is the quote here, another possible is possible. So thinking about this speculative idea of if we can envision it, it won't be this surprising thing we can move toward. This is Max Leberon, they, them. They written a couple of books that have really been impressionable for me. Helps me think about how to problematize ideas around like Anthropocene, which I'll talk about, how the state takes control of bodies, how I think but it's really powerful. It's an indigenous scholar out of Canada. This is David Abram, The Spell of the Sensuous. So of these, I think there's a few European descent, but I'm trying also to read beyond European authors. Most of my life, I think I have been heavily influenced by that. This is Braiding Sweetgrass. Robin Wall Kimmerer really plays a heavy role in some of the work I'll share with you today. Indigenous scholar, scientist who's trying to think about how those worlds can come together. And then Design Justice. This is the thinking about community and justice. So here's the authors I really need to give some acknowledgement to and credit for. So equally as much or more of thinking about what I'll share today comes from Dr. Veronica Castle-McGowan, University of Washington, Bothell. I think she's 3-4 years maybe out of her PhD program at the University of Washington. Amazing scholar that I learn a ton from, pushes me to think expansively in ways I didn't before we started collaborating. We've also brought in some amazing students. So Dr. Hannah Cook, not doctor yet, but will be soon. Hannah Cook, as a graduate student at the University of Connecticut, will be another hopefully influential researcher in science ed in the near future. And then Amanda Ellis was a pre-service teacher, but now is a teacher. And we feature one of the units, food sovereignty units, that she developed in this chapter. And so she was a co-author with us. Some of the work we've published around it so far, this is early in this work of our trying to refine it, is in the Science Scope, which is a middle school practitioner journal for middle school teachers by the National Science Teachers Association. This was us trying to think with our Engineering for Ecological and Social Justice framework we're developing. It's developed around high leverage practices, which have been widely researched in the field of teacher education. So we're using those high leverage practices to work on our framework. We're thinking about pollinators and perspective taking that we might engage learners in as part of work they do. We more refined our framework in this chapter in an edited book by my friend, BFF, Dr. Xavier Fazio. He's done a lot more work in environmental education than I have, as evidenced by him being the editor of the book, Science Curriculum for the Anthropocene, and then we have this chapter. So I can share, most of what I'm sharing today comes from this chapter. I want to share how it's influencing other work that we're doing at UConn as well, and beyond UConn. Here's some headlines I thought could set the stage. I'm at a space where I know you're aware of this and care. This is the time that we find our place right now. We're at the precipice of this thing that humans have been a part of influencing, and so I just tried to pull some current headlines. So Pakistan, they're evacuating 100,000 people. This is a year after 1,700 people died from flooding. We have this monumental ocean temperatures happening right now, but it's reported then in February. We had the heavy flooding in Dubai. All these are connected to this human-caused climate change. I'm going to problematize that just a little bit, but human-caused climate change, not enough to make you come at me. I know it. And then we had, during the COVID, the Pacific Northwest heat dome that was tragic for a wide range of species. So that's where we find ourselves, and then now we're trying to think about, like, how do we create instruction for youth that would give them some interrogational strategies and also position them to think potentially differently about the world, and to give them a hope on what they can do as a trajectory for their engagement into the future. So challenges that all of this brings to us are, we'd argue we need new frameworks and practices for the Anthropocene and learning and teaching, Anthropocene learning and teaching. It's complex, and it doesn't seem like we should go about business as usual. We should question these universalizing ontologies that got us here in the first place, so we're not just trying to techno-fix our way out of it on the backside. And this is all connected to our powered and industrial world making that we've been engaged in. Also, these problems are complex, interconnected, and transdisciplinary. Alan was describing how he's trying to think about earth science in other disciplines, and even that's a challenge for us. Some possibility, though, let me first just problematize the Anthropocene. This probably isn't anything new to people, but I even, if given the choice, wouldn't use it. I see the power of Anthropocene as this, we gotta let people know that humans have caused climate change. But the most recent IPCC report would talk about, like, not all humans did that. Industrialized nations did that, have done that, continue to do that, and others haven't been as culpable, but will be more vulnerable. So this idea of the Anthropocene, Max Leberl will talk about how, like, this really allows those most culpable to bring other people into the fold to try to fight this battle, but those other people may not be as responsible for those people who want to take up the lead in leading the charge for change, who may not be the best people to take up that lead in leading the charge to change, because they may be the people the people that were part of thinking that was allowed this to happen in the first place. I don't think I did a great job of problematizing it, but that's my kind of hesitancy in using it, although I recognize the power of it. This leads already to possibilities. So we can design environments and pedagogies that focus on these ontological multiplicity, different ways of orienting to the world that might be powerful, that might not be part of how Westerners look at the world, and it could give us some different priorities. We might think more about intersectionality, relationality, community building, agency, and I love this idea of, like, radical care. Like, what if we lifted up care as a commitment that guided the work that we were engaged in, or engaging learners to think about. One thing we're thinking about possibility is trying to think about heterogeneity as an input, like multiple ways of thinking and being culturally rooted that come into experiences in learning and then also go out of those experiences. So they don't come in as these tools that allow us to make people interested and then get all mashed up into this one world perspective and come out the other side. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but a lot of, in the next generation science standards, which I'm a big advocate of, a lot of that is we're really aware of how students' interests need to play a role. Interests, ideas, identities need to be part of how they think about learning, but what comes out on the other side are generally these uniform, homogeneous explanations, the scientific explanation, and we can do more than that. And so we've been trying to think about how do we not compromise the integrity or rigor of the science that students are learning, but think about how it can be more expansive and what comes out the other side that's still connected to values, place, and broader ontological perspectives. So we want a possibility, we love the possibility of centering relationality. I know this group in particular probably has thought about that more than most. Positioning land and species as agentic place-based partners. And that's thinking about how land and species do world build, and we're part of that even though we don't always recognize it. So we draw heavily on this critical, speculative, and place-based approaches. We think about it in the context of engineering education. The next generation science standards include engineering as part of what happens in classrooms for K-12 science learners. So they're trying to find space for engineering in the already overcrowded curriculum. And so in the most recent standards, engineering became part of our science standards. And I was a bit resistant early because I said, what kind of training do I have to help support pre-service teachers in this work? But I've changed a little bit and challenged myself. I think my pre-service teachers that I work with and also the in-service teachers probably have, I feel like I wasn't doing justice to what I should have been doing in the work that I was doing with them. So I need to support them and how they bring engineering into science instruction since it is part of the work that we do. So this work has allowed me to orient to it in ways that doesn't conflict with the commitments that I have as an educator, and I'll share more about that. So issues, and this is what made me cringe about early thoughts about integrating engineering into classroom. First, I don't know much about it, but then what I do know about it is its connection to these problematic traditions, especially connected to many times Western orientations to engineering. So systemic injustices are perpetuated through our dualistic material infrastructure and techno-saviorism. So we're creating things quickly without realizing the reverberating impacts these things we create, these spaces we've disrupted pathways through, what it will do to human and beyond human. Designs often start before understanding complex place-based problems. There's research I'll cite later that talks about some researchers have found that 70% of design work is about problem scoping, or should be. And so it's we don't often spin that. It's the lure of getting right to the design because that's what's going to take all the money, but we do it in ways that's problematic and doesn't think about the environment or sustainability. And this is connected to that last one, short-term profits. The K-12 problems with engineering is learners are engaged in prescriptive top-down problem solving. Today we're going to create the fastest car, and students go at it, and they've built something. And there's not a lot of, it's not rooted in what might be the most important kinds of societal things we could engage learners in thinking about. And it isn't really rooted in helping them think about engineering as this critical interrogation of what should be done before it's done. Another one that really makes me think heavily is the way to solve the problem is to know the science. So this idea that problem solving is solely a technical thing. If you knew the science, you could do it. There's a socio-technical aspect of all science application. COVID has helped us see that. And so moving beyond just saying, if we could help this community see the science, they would know what to do, I think is what we want to do. Limits what counts as engineering knowledge. Even before professional engineering schools emerged, people were engineering and designing. And so trying to recognize that as well. Here's some parts of what critical speculative place-based approaches give us. So they recognize expansive engineering scope, participants, and goals. They think about who and towards what end this work happens. They think about ways human and more than human have contributed to world making. So I was thinking this morning about how like species, beavers, environments have shaped community food practices. Like we don't often give enough thought to it, but how we're shaped by the environment, the agentic actions of the environment around us. When these extreme weather events happen, we can't. Aspects of creation, I mentioned that. We have a new engineering educator at UConn. I'm ecstatic her work is focused on this. Instead of just preparing engineers to know the technical aspects of their work, we're really thinking about how do they consider the socio-technical aspects of the communities they're designing with and for. Acknowledge ontological aspects for ecological and plural world making. In K-12, this might mean engaging in local dreaming and about thriving futures. So positioning young learners to think about what would a thriving future be for humans and more than humans and environments. All those are connected. Emphasize problem complexity and questioning. So we really spend a lot of time interrogating, thinking carefully about how we're about to disrupt the flow. I'll come back to that. We use models for storytelling and re-storytelling. So a story of this is what is and this is what we hope will become. We highlight the necessity of this situated world making. Like design shouldn't come from experts from afar. It should be it should be collaboration in local contexts. I think in referencing More Than Human, I'm drawing there on indigenous perspectives, especially Megan Bang's work. She's very influential in the field of science education, part of the national academies at Northwestern University. It thinks about humans as these parts of interconnected ecological systems, tries to push back on like human superiority, gives intrinsic value and agency to non-humans. So it includes plants, it includes the environment, elements of the environment, thinking about we're all really interconnected. We can't really pollute a lake and just not swim in it, and that's okay. That's enough to prevent the harm to us and the other elements of that ecosystem around it. Here's other things we think critical speculative design helps us with. Engage learners in complex systems thinking and modeling to critique community infrastructuring. This is connected to this process ontology. I love the complex systems modeling. It's not new to this group, I'm positive. Encourage learners to envision and reconstruct community design for desired futures. It helps us highlight the racialized and unjust landscapes of engineered spaces so they can see, students begin to see redlining what impact it has on communities, food access, and these other things that are influenced by design. So we're not just positioning students to see the dire nature of their circumstance. Instead, we want to couple that with opportunities for design and hope. So that's the last bullet over there. To build resilience, agency, and hope, acts of criticality are coupled with collective speculative reimagining. So we're trying to position youth to really take a stance of understanding deeply and then position them to think about what actions might look like on the other side. I really like this. It was a comparison by Dune and Raby about traditional engineering and critical engineering. I won't read it, but I'd love to let you look at it for a few minutes of just the comparisons. And so those are the kinds of things we've thought about. Here's a representation. I went fast, sorry. Here's a representation we include in our chapter. And this gets back to that heterogeneity as an input and output. So we, as educators committed to heterogeneity, also environmental and social justice, we want to think about like how experiences don't just force people to see the world in one particular way. So you can see what a traditional classroom how it might be situated, disciplinary knowledge, standards, materials, students' prior knowledge come in. This is NGSS, I think, and I'm part of the NGSS community. Hopefully they don't abandon me because of what I'm saying. This is the kinds of experience they have, and then they come out with this. Now we have an explanation of how a tanker car imploded, a phenomenon we were looking at. But we all have the same one because we came to agreement on it. Another perspective, and I'm not saying we don't need to continue to do that. I think we just need other opportunities as well. So here it's community practices. These are the inputs: disciplinary knowledge, critical social technical literacy, everyday knowledge, materials, case studies that students can look at. All these things go in. There's this kind of speculative design, this complex systems modeling they're engaged in across this unit of instruction. And on the other side, there's these possibilities that emerge, and they're plural possibilities that students get to design. I'll also come back to it, but we think about these opportunities like design charrettes, which are really quick opportunities for design because we want them to be plural. We also want them to be ready to be negotiated with communities and among peers. So what we've done is we've built this EESJ, Engineering for Ecological and Social Justice, with these high leverage practices. There's a long history of research on high leverage practice in teacher education. It's this idea that there are some practices that if we used, we could engage students in ambitious forms of science teaching. Ambitious forms of science teaching would be those that they're really complex. So we give students space to share ideas about some real world phenomenon or problem of consequence to their community. And then we're responsive enough to improvise the way we engage with students based on what we're hearing and learning and how their ideas might be these stepping stones that we can build on across a unit. The HLPs are adaptable to context, guide classroom complexities, and teacher improvisations. So ones that we have come up with as part of this work, which is built on other work from especially ambitious science teaching is a pretty influential one in science education, K-12 science education. So there's some similarities in how we've thought about these high leverage practices and the work that they're doing as well. So it starts with planning, high leverage practice, planning for multiplicity. I'm going to go into detail about these, and then I have a case study, a couple of case studies I can share with you that gives you even more ideas from a middle school and a high school unit. We elicit students' knowledge, interests, and experiences, so we're trying to open the learning space right away with students' ideas being central, interest and experiences being central to how they're going to learn. Also connected to the problem, the problems we'll engage in. This next one's way too long. You can just say iterative problem scoping using complex systems modeling. We should change that. And then designing ecologically and socially just solutions with an S is the last one. And so we try to arrange, right now when I work with pre-service teachers, we use the ambitious science teaching, high leverage practices to support them to be ready to go into student teaching. So ambitious science teaching says planning around big science ideas, eliciting students' initial ideas, supporting ongoing changes in thinking where you put ideas on the table they can think with, and then developing evidence-based explanations. And we're just trying to be a little bit more expensive with that to honor that heterogeneity commitment, among other things. So planning for instruction for multiplicity we focus on complex issues to situate engineering in the social, ecological, and historical contexts. So we have, I think, the critique sometimes of Western perspectives and stances in work is that it ignores the historicity. It doesn't think about the powered decisions that were made to get us where we are, to think about how do we make sure we change those powered decisions before we jump to the other side to try to fix things. Adopts asset views of students, teachers, communities, thinks of science and engineering as a cultural practice. This is aligned to the framework for K-12 science education. That's the compendium document for the next generation science standards. It's also drawn on Megan Banks' work that says, like, science and engineering is this cultural practice. It can be more broadly recognized. We challenge universal science and engineering knowledge. This pushes back on the one world, this idea that developing countries can become developed if they just look at the world using these lenses and these tools. And I think those tools can be part of it, but we shouldn't be thinking of development as moving toward our pinnacle of accomplishment. Commitment to heterogeneity, foregrounding place in learning, centering local plural knowledges, including species and elements in teaching. So this builds on Priya Pugh's work, which also involves Megan Banks, and then Learning in Places is Megan Banks' project that you could use that as a good resource for indigenous science experiences for I think it's elementary learners. Eliciting students' knowledge, interests, and experiences, a second high leverage practice. So students' ideas drive equitable student-centered instruction. There's early elicitation of students' ideas. Plans are continuously adapted based on those ideas as you move across instruction in the unit. We use instructional practice like self-documentation, I'll describe here, to connect complex issues to the lives of students in their communities. And here's self-documentation is just photographic data that students might bring in that's part of the world they live in that would help educators better understand the cultural ways they engage with what we're about to learn about and use that as a foundation for that learning. This is kind of driving local connections, foreground students' assets instead of deficits we want to do, and also heterogeneity, the different ways that students from our communities orient to what we're thinking about. We want students to see the designs in their worlds, so this self-documentation helps them do that. We have a pollinator pathways unit that I was going to share about, and that's what does your community look like from the perspective of a pollinator? Where would they go, and where might they not be able to go, and how could we change that so they could more freely move through our communities in ways that are more just for the more than human, but probably also more just for the human. This is the iterative problem scoping using complex system model. I shortened it again. Engage students in critical, place-based investigations of communities' powered design impact on human and ecological health. So this is the part where we really dig into problem scoping. We use complex systems models. I'm going to dig into this in a minute. But complex systems models are like this. In NGSS, we use models, explanatory models. So students share their ideas. Over time, we iterate those ideas using models as this practice that's just a thinking tool so that when they engage with others around the model building, representing their ideas, they can argue about which ideas fit and don't. And by the end of the unit, and the ideas that have been shared and included, they have a more scientifically grounded explanation across the unit. In these units, we're using complex systems models as these ways to uplift a focus on relationality, and really it's ontological multiplicity. We want the students to think about the world in ways that are beyond how Western science potentially or often does. So I'll share more about that. I know it's not new to you, but the way we're thinking about, or the reason we're thinking about using them is maybe a new perspective. Problem scoping, again, always giving them opportunities to take what they're learning into the models to see how the models are changed. Here, problem scoping, I referenced this earlier. It talks about Altman et al. 2008 says 70% of time for designers is spent on problem context. So we want to make sure students get that opportunity to deeply interrogate. Here, complex system model, they foreground process ontology. And this is, I think, situates them, students, us, to begin to think about different ways of being and seeing in the world. And so it's connected to this. If you think about systems, you start to think about relationality. You start to think about reciprocity. How does what I do contribute to other things? And how does what other things do connect and contribute to me, my health, my community, my well-being? And then also maybe lifts up this idea of responsibility. So we don't want to misappropriate indigenous ideas, but drawing on them could help us reorient and solve some of the problems of the Anthropocene. So these are just some more theoretical ideas. So I'll try to summarize and I'll come back to it. This really powerful paper by Hertz here says a lot of Western science is shaped around substance ontology, this idea that we pull something out of its context and we study it deeply. And that positions us, that's that first quote, from this kind of godlike perspective where we understand, we look to understand it, but we're apart from it. And so it also positions us to extract it from where it came from, and also exploit it for the benefit of us without thinking about it where it sits. Process ontology is different than that. It is also used in Western science, I wouldn't deny that, but it's also connected to this kind of indigenous perspective. It says here, constant flux and dynamism dominate. Everything exists through process and relations. They don't exist prior to any process as they do from a substance perspective. They are created by a combination of processes that interact and are maintained. So the process ontology allows students to get a perspective of how everything is connected, and changes to one thing is going to reverberate positively or negatively to other things in the environment. For us, if we think of engineering, this all comes back to if we focus on process ontology, we don't say that out loud. We say we focus on how things are connected and how decisions need to consider broader broader influences of the decisions we'd make. It allows us to move from a product focus to a community and justice-centered design focus in engineering as a part of K-12 education. Here's an example. I know if someone in here could teach me how to better create an example of this, I'm humbled by the audience that I'm in. This is an example from the pollinator's perspective of the different kinds of things that influence pollinator and human health, and how students create these. They're quick, they come back to these often, they think about them all the way through to the time they get ready to propose a design, and then they think about how the proposed design is going to change this flow in positive ways, ideally. Designing, this is the last part, critical speculative design aids students in diverse solution creation. That's what we want to accomplish. Solutions encompass artifacts, stories, visions, questions. We surface multiple solutions at the end of units instead of one classroom explanation of the imploding tanker car. Final student solutions are shared and negotiated with communities. I'm going to come back to that. Solutions may involve these kinds of things, depending on the unit and depending on the teacher in the classroom. For design charrettes, that's the one I wanted to talk about briefly. It's just the short collaborative sessions where designs are imagined, shared, and negotiated with the community. So it's like an opportunity to get ideas out that are based on the values of the students, values, commitments, and knowledge, ideas and interests of the students, and then also engage with those designs with other people who likely students would want to be sure they've engaged with if they were going to make some kind of community design decision. I have a couple of case studies, and I'm going to stop it. I might just show one of them, and then I'm going to stop in time to answer some questions. So I'll try to, maybe I've talked a lot about already the middle school conservation corridor one, so I'll go to the food sovereignty one. And just kind of, well, I did want to show this is what self-documentation looks like in that pollinator unit. So none of the pictures are here. This is what students would go home the first beginning of the unit with. What is the pollinator, what does the community look like from a pollinator's perspective? Where would it pollinate? where would it struggle to pollinate? How could we think, what kinds of things, what might we do to make it a more habitable place for those pollinators? And then we also do things in the unit that connect pollinator health to human health. So we're not just doing it for pollinators, we're doing it for the community environment and human health. I'll go to this one. So this is the food sovereignty. You can see here, this is gardening happening locally, and this is industrial food supply chain with vegetables protected with plastic. High school food sovereignty, these are the kinds of things that happen across the unit. We explore human health and local global food systems. We examine the school food program, and we compare that to healthy eating recommendations by like the Department of Agriculture. We consider local and national policy shaping these food systems. We relate this to other things like industrial agricultural, industrial food processing, fossil fuel use, food and packaging waste. We have them think about all those things. Students learn about unsustainable school food systems and also about stories of schools that have looked to change their food systems to become more locally sourced. And then they use this speculative design platform of Minecraft to build, imagine, in ways that are somewhat low stakes, but give them space to do this work and tell stories to others. High school planning instruction for multiplicity. Here, this is how we're honoring this high leverage practice, how we're accomplishing it in this unit, designed based on cultural health, cultural food practices, and ecological processes. We're going to move beyond just the USDA guidelines for healthy eating to think expansively. We're going to recognize where there's some cultures that have thrived in ways that do contradict the USDA's healthy eating guidelines, and there's an example for that. Eliciting their ideas, we use the self-documentation to help them think about healthy foods with their families. We use oral stories to think about how elders in our communities have experienced changes in what they eat and how they eat and where it came from. We share, we kind of co-construct healthy eating's meanings from our community ideas and what we're learning from the USDA guidelines. And we build posters that can inform our complex models as we move to the next part. Here, students compare past, present food systems at home. I already said that. They compare the community food practices to the USDA's diet recommendations. They analyze school menus, look for the ecological footprint of those menus. They find that many times the meals come from 1,500 miles away from their campus, and they think about the impact of that on their environment. Designing for these, ecological and social justice solutions, students design new school food systems in the Minecraft. They can do that and I can't. They focus on this just, culturally relevant, healthy, and sustainable systems as they do it in that platform. It's the space for speculative world making, and they share this in a kind of gaming activity with their peers, but they also share it with the stories with their community, their parents, and others in their community. And I'll end with just other ways this work is spreading into other things I do in the advanced science teaching methods. I've underserved our students around environmental, especially climate education. So it's helping me think of how to lift up climate education alongside this engineering. So our students didn't get enough engineering focus. Now they're going to get that. But in this, we're working toward it. We're not there yet. And then I'm also part of this national collaborative around the food, energy, water nexus, where this work is kind of percolating through that as well. There's in the advanced science teaching methods, we've built some templates with this EESJ framework that students can use for planning instruction, planning curriculum that they'll implement with their students. That's local, and there's some examples of what's emerged so far. Like an energy sovereignty unit, the impact of severe weather. And this is the most recent local agricultural practices and climate change. And then here's the collaborative work. This is a group of science teacher educators across the nation. We're using kind of more the commitments of the EESJ to interrogate this food, energy, water nexus. This is most of this work has been, in the field of agriculture. So we're using these ideas to push those industrialized practices of agriculture and think about accountability in those. And we're doing kind of same kinds of interrogations in this work. And last thing we're doing this fall coming up is we're gonna design like short community science data talks that can happen in classrooms. So it might take 15 minutes with some local data. A couple of those are designed by us. We ask teachers to let us come in for about 15 minutes. We have an idea that these will create a data story, not just data talk, but after 2 of ours that we've built, we might invite the class to build their own, and then we have a data story that's emerging that they can think with. And then we did create this 2-page practice brief with STEM teaching tools. It's out of the University of Washington, so it's got a lot of resources. This is the way this group is trying to get traction and collaborating to think about our K-12 food, energy, water nexus work. And that is me. I put LinkedIn, but I don't know if that's actually what you would use to get. I know if you used it, it's too long. And you can reach out for references. I could also share a chapter or any paper, anything I reference, I could get you enough to get to it. So.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yeah, July, want to start us off? And could you repeat the question for our online listeners?
Thank you so much. The talk's really interesting. A question that struck me is relating to emotional management. So, in a more traditional engineering class, if we're just analyzing why a tanker car imploded, that's unlikely to elicit an emotional reaction from the students, while the kind of teaching style you're talking about here, I think, could provoke very, very strong emotions. So like, I think about, for example, the high school food sovereignty thing. A lot of high school students struggle with food security. They struggle with eating disorders. They struggle, like food, if they're engaging with food in a very personal way, it can bring up a lot of strong emotions. So I guess my question is, how would you, did you incorporate or think about how to manage emotions that might come up for students when you're teaching with this sort of style?
Yeah, so the question, I'm gonna summarize it. Hopefully, shake your head if you think it's enough. It's how do we support students' emotional reaction to the kinds of things they might experience as they learn about place-based, justice-focused work like food sovereignty. I don't yet think we've done enough. Like some of the work we're doing, we have another project. It's a justice-centered, ambitious science teaching project, and so in it we really commit to, part of our work is building practices that allow us to create spaces in classrooms of trust, relationships that will help be that kind of emotional support. I don't think we've gotten there with this work yet. It's not a funded project yet. It doesn't have to be to get there. But I think it's something we need to think really carefully about, is like, I think we maybe do it early in our pre-service teacher education, where we talk about like learning only happens when relationships are built, when respect for learners and instructors is negotiated through care over time. And so I think it would be connected to that, but I don't think we're there. So I'll make a note of that's what we need to keep working on.
Yeah, Jean.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. I was very intrigued by the idea of heterogeneity, inputs and outputs. And, I think about the fact that sometimes we have these set outputs because they're easy to grade and easy to know with progress, to compare. And so I'm just kind of curious, when you think about those heterogeneity of outputs, how are you able to enable, enable teachers to demonstrate they're doing what they hope they're doing?
Yeah. That's the challenge, and that's what people need to hold us accountable to as well. I think the way it's like for me, this is NGS, more around NGSS, and then I'll try to apply it here, is the idea that like, if I engage students in modeling across a unit, I'm going to get their initial ideas, and then I'm going to get their final models negotiated with their peers or their final evidence-based explanation. If I could show that to parents, that's a really powerful example of how over time ideas showed up that have explanatory power that wasn't there earlier, and your student can use it to negotiate this explanation. So I used that alongside rubrics to assess those, and the rubrics would give me, I guess, a little bit more flexibility to allow students to arrive at that level of accomplishment. In this realm, I think I would try to do something similar with, we're really committed to this like idea that we want different artifacts, stories, questions emerging on the other side. So trying to construct some criteria in the rubrics that would allow students to know what we hope they get to, and then us to make some case about how this reflects what they picked up. Like they're picking up that food sovereignty is important because it pushes back. They've learned about these industrial practices of food systems we rely on, that they've learned about community food practice. So like those things should be showing up in their artifacts, and if I could use that as a criteria, it would give me a little bit more space to navigate schools' schools' need for some efficiency in how they measure learning.
Yeah, sir.
Really fascinating talk. This is way beyond what I think about, so I really enjoyed learning something very new to me. And it sounds like a really great framework for learning and educating, and I'm curious about sort of what it would take to be widely adopted in the U.S. in education, and how it fits in with, like, I understand we have a lot of like standardized testing, and so how would, do we need like a complete like revolution of everything we do in schools, and get rid of standardized tests, which look for very specific things, or I'm just curious about
I don't know the answers, and this is the problem that I think many people are trying to solve. Is like, for me, my first inclination is, and this is where we're already started. That's what our advanced methods class is about. Is like a framework is necessary to help us co-negotiate with our pre-service teachers how science teaching could look different, what it could commit to that's different. And then there's some particular, so I can build these heuristics or planning templates that help them craft instruction. And as part of the crafting of instruction, it's also giving them ideas about how they interact with learners as part of it. And so that helps them build particular units to get started, and I'm imagining it could spread from there. For the assessment part, I did before this morning have some hope that like the next generation science standards is helping us think more expansively about rich forms of assessment. So I think we could build on that, but I know those are getting crushed. The rich forms of assessment that came with NGSS, the National Academy's documents, much of that is getting crushed by school systems that have a need for efficiency for the scale at which they operate. So I don't know that I answered, other than like my own idea is like I can support pre-service teachers around high leverage practices that position them to have gained some early success with students and help students see the world differently, and then they could keep building from that. And in-service teachers.
We have a question from online to follow up on July's question about emotional needs of students. Does communicating the value of students' unique perspectives enhance their confidence in their ability to do science or become scientists?
I love that. We do think carefully about identity. It's like who students are, who they are told they are by others in social settings. I would say the idea of like here's my theoretical ideas of identity. It's built around competence, performance, and recognition. This isn't my idea, it's somebody else's. Competence, performance, and recognition. You can't really be a kind of person who does something if you don't have some tools that allow you to find some success in the pursuits that kind of person does. So we want to support learners to gain success, to pick up those competences and the performances in ways that allow them to accomplish pursuits, and that's the job of a teacher. And then we want to position them for recognition among their peers so that they could say, this is the kind of person who could gain success and help us all out in this pursuit. And then we want to gain internal recognition for them. We want them to see that for themselves. And I think all of this kind of positioning them to design, interrogate, and have a voice, I do think that could be powerful in creating the kind of identities that intersect with science in ways that we want science to be changed over time. Yes?
You started to talk about some different parts of different case studies. Have those been implemented in classrooms? And if so, are they public school classrooms? And what were the biggest challenges?
The question is, has this been implemented in classrooms on a limited basis so far? So where I was giving my colleague Veronica, like she's the one that's implemented the pollinator and the food sovereignty in classrooms. So the food sovereignty was part of a student teaching semester, so that's the entry it's getting. And it was implemented in the classroom, and they did use the Minecraft. The pollinator one also implemented in Washington around the work that Veronica's doing. The ones I've been able to work with are with pre-service teachers in design. So they've designed the units. I think they're the early versions, and 3 years from now they'll be better. But they're ones that they're in the last year of their program. They're going to take jobs this spring, and they're going to have their own classroom in the fall. So I'm trying to position them to design these so that they would have the possibility of using them next year. So that's the stage that we're at in public schools. All those are in public schools.
I'm curious, in terms of evaluation of students and their experience with this sort of project in the classroom, building models together, what their reactions are, like their enthusiasm for these types of things, because I know sometimes active learning strategies or something very different from memorization and other things they've experienced, and is there any pushback or is it embraced by the students?
The question is, what's the reaction of students and when they experience this or other types of ambitious forms of instruction? I want to say, I think there probably is the pushback of people who have found success in traditional classrooms, possibly. So I would acknowledge that. I also think this is one of our pre-service teachers. Now she's a teacher. It was at NSTA when asked some similar questions. She was talking about how I started engaging students in these ambitious forms of teaching, like modeling. We have model-based inquiry is another project I do. And my thought was I'd do a unit and then I'd do something else. And she's like, after I did that, when I tried to go back to more traditional forms of instruction, they weren't having it. We had to do something more engaging. And when they had teachers before them in middle school who were doing these engaging things, where we're trying to explain things that happen in the world, or we're trying to solve some complex problems, if they're arriving in high school, there's going to be resistance to us going back to them sitting and listening to me lay things out uniformly out of context. So I think that would be a positive response. We have a little bit more evidence, and I don't do a lot of quantitative work, but we did develop this opportunity to learn survey around the next generation science standards. And so it was what do students report as their experiences in classrooms? And we tried to do it around the practice turn. We said, to what extent are students getting an opportunity to engage in the practice turn? And so these kinds of experiences, the evidence we collected around the few that we've collected, tell us that students are getting opportunities to engage in the practice turn. It doesn't really answer your question about what is their reaction. The reaction, that doesn't measure their reaction, it just says that it can happen, and they can report that they critique and revise ideas over time, that they engage in arguments with each other about ideas in ways that allow them to change ideas over time. So.
It's 12 o'clock. Thank you all for being here. Let's thank Dr. Campbell again. And invite you to continue conversations at lunch at 1 o'clock in conference room 2. We'll be having an open conversation about the interface of informal and formal systems, and then a happy hour at 4. So thanks again, and see you later.